Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode on contemporary Western philosophers. Today, we'll take a look at Jaspers' philosophy of man. Now, Karl Jaspers believed that philosophy should help people find meaning in life, especially in times of crisis when traditional sources of guidance, such as religion, seem to fail. Now, his ideas about human nature and the roles of philosophers are deeply connected to this mission. He begins by speaking of the prophetic philosopher. And here he was deeply influenced by the sociologist and economist Max Weber, whom he admired as a great German thinker. Now, Weber believed that true leadership was not about seeking power for its own sake, but about creating a moral and spiritual society. And therefore, Jaspers took this idea and he developed his concept of a prophetic philosopher. Now, who is a prophetic philosopher according to Jaspers? A prophetic philosopher is one who, like a prophet, guides people toward deeper truths about existence. Now, imagine there is a society where people stop questioning the truth and simply follow what political leaders or the media tell them. Now, for example, in Nazi Germany, many university professors and students abandoned independent thinking and blindly supported Hitler. Now, Jaspers saw this as a failure of philosophy and education. And therefore, the role of the philosopher, according to Jaspers, is to awaken the consciousness of the people. It is in a way to awaken awareness. It is to help them to think critically and remind themselves of the higher spiritual values beyond politics and power. Jaspers then calls philosophy as a substitute for religion. He saw that in the 20th century, traditional religion was kind of losing its significance. And as a result of it, many young people were without spiritual guidance. And therefore, he believed that philosophy should fill this gap by awakening what he called as the philosophical faith. That is a kind of a deep personal awareness of transcendence. And here he said that instead of just teaching history or logical arguments, philosophers should inspire people to search for meaning, much like how the religious prophets of old used to do. Imagine there is a young person today who is struggling to find meaning in a world dominated by consumerism, technology, and social media. They may feel lost because of traditional religion as it no longer speaks to them. Now, a prophetic philosopher would not only teach theories, but he would also help this young person to awaken to deeper questions about life, about existence, and their role in the universe. And by doing so, we see that the philosopher creates a condition for a new springtime. For religion. And here we see that faith is based on personal discovery rather than on blind tradition. Next, Jaspers speaks about the great exceptions. Now, he believed that throughout history there have been certain exceptional individuals who helped humanity see its greatest possibilities. And in a way, we see that these people challenged people to make meaningful choices about their lives. Now, he had planned to write a 3-volume book called The Great Philosophers, which aimed to introduce readers to these exceptional individuals so that they could be inspired and provoked to think deeply about their own lives. And for him, he saw Jesus and Buddha as the great philosophers. Why? Because these are the people who brought a different kind of wisdom. Now, unlike traditional philosophers who focused on logic and reason, Jesus and the Buddha brought a different kind of wisdom, one that transformed human thinking about compassion, suffering, and transcendence. And Jaspers saw them as examples of prophetic philosophers who awakened people to deeper truths beyond everyday concerns. For example, we see that Jesus taught about love, forgiveness, and the kingdom of God. And he challenged people to rethink their values. The Buddha, on the other hand, taught about suffering and enlightenment. And in this way, he helped people understand the deeper nature of their existence. Now, both of them, according to Jaspers, helped people awaken to higher truths, just as he believed philosophy should do. Next, he speaks about Kierkegaard and Nietzsche, and according to him, he sees that these are two fundamental choices. Now, he believed that in the modern world, people face two philosophical paths. And which are they? They are the path of Christianity, that is represented by Kierkegaard, and the path of atheism, represented by Nietzsche. Now, he even called these two thinkers as revelations. Why? Because they present two extreme yet fundamental options up for understanding life. Now, Soren Kierkegaard speaks about the leap of faith. Kierkegaard believed that human beings could only find true meaning through a personal and passionate relationship with God. And therefore, he argued that faith is not based on reason alone, but requires a leap into the unknown. On the other hand, Friedrich Nietzsche spoke about the death of God. So he famously declared that God is dead, meaning that traditional religious beliefs were no longer relevant now. And he called for a radical re-evaluation of values, encouraging people to create their own meaning rather than to follow outdated religious ideas. For example, imagine standing at crossroads. There is one path that leads to faith and trust in a higher power. On the other hand, there is another road which in a way leads you to create your own values in a world that is there without God. Now, Jaspers saw both of these options as important and valid challenges. Why? Because each person must decide which path makes sense for them. Now, he did not say which was right or wrong, but he wanted people to face these choices consciously rather than just drifting away through life. And therefore, we see that Jaspers' philosophy of man tried to emphasize that the philosopher was a guide, not just a thinker but a prophet. And therefore, he felt that philosophy should replace the lost religion and inspire people to reflect on life's deepest question. And we may ask, why does this matter today? Well, in a world where people struggle to find meaning, we see that this idea can help us to remember that philosophy is not about abstract truths or abstract theories. It is about helping people live better, more conscious lives. And whether through faith, reason, or personal discovery, we are all challenged to seek deeper truths and make meaningful choices. Now, Jaspers also will speak about man as possible existence. Now, he viewed human beings in a very different way than scientists or other social researchers do. He saw humans as free and constantly evolving beings. So instead of seeing them as fixed and already made entities, he basically saw them as free and constantly evolving beings. This means that each person is full of possibilities, and it is through our choices and actions we can in a way shape who we become. Now, he also speaks as man as free and self-creating being. Now, Jaspers believed that humans are not just passive objects, but they exist as active agents. So for him, we are not passive objects that just exist in a fixed way, like rock or tree or animal that simply follows instincts. Instead, he said that we are active agents who make ourselves through our decisions. So in a way, whatever happens is because of the paths that we choose. And here he says that every person has, in a way, multiple possibilities for life. So when we choose one path, we exclude the others, which means we are always shaping and limiting our existence through our decisions. That is why Jaspers calls man as possible existence. Why? Because we are always becoming something rather than just being something already made. And therefore, imagine a young person who has multiple career options. They could either become a doctor or an artist or an teacher. Now, if they choose to become a doctor, they actualize that possibility but close off the others. Similarly, if they had chosen to be an artist, they would have completely developed a different side of themselves. And therefore, here we see that this freedom of choice means that we are never completely defined. We always have the potential to change and to grow. Now, he speaks about the meaning of existence and self-transcendence. Now, the word existence, which is a key term for Jaspers, is more than just existing. So for Jaspers, it's very important because it is more than just existing in a physical sense. It refers to the ways in which humans stand outside of themselves. And therefore, this word existence comes from the Latin word esistere, which means to stand out. And this means that humans are constantly looking beyond themselves, beyond their current situation, beyond their immediate desires, and beyond life itself. And in this way, this self-transcendence is what makes us unique compared to other living beings. For example, a dog does not sit and wonder, what is the meaning of my existence? It simply follows its instincts. A human, however, will question their existence. He will imagine different possibilities for their future and seek meaning beyond mere survival. Now, this search for meaning leads people towards two fundamental choices. One is that of theism, where some people find meaning in religion and spirituality, believing in a higher purpose or a higher power. For example, Soren Kierkegaard argued that people must take a leap of faith and commit to belief in God. Another choice is that of atheism, which in a way rejects transcendence. And here we see that people like Friedrich Nietzsche reject religious explanations and seek meaning in human will and power instead of God. For example, Nietzsche famously declared that God is dead, arguing that people must create their own values. And therefore we see that for Jaspers, there is no scientific proof that can determine which of these paths is correct. Each person must make a free decision about what they believe. Now, Jaspers also believed that human beings naturally encounter the transcendence in their lives. But this is not something we can prove like a scientific fact. Instead, it is something we often feel the presence and we experience in moments of crisis, limitations, and deep reflections. And therefore, he says that we often feel the presence of something beyond ourselves when we face our own limitations, such as when we experience suffering, failure, or loss. Imagine someone who loses a loved one. This event forces them to confront the reality of death and question the meaning of life. And therefore, in that moment, they may feel the presence of something greater than themselves, a longing for answers beyond what science can provide. And therefore, according to Jaspers, he says that this moment of realization does not automatically lead to religious faith. Why? Because it in a way presents a choice to the person. They can either take a leap of philosophical faith, choosing to believe in the transcendence, and here this belief in transcendence is without proof or without evidence. And the second choice, like Nietzsche, they can reject transcendence and try to explain everything in human terms. Now we may ask ourselves, what is this philosophical faith that Nietzsche is talking about over here? Well, philosophical faith is something that is different. Why? Because Jaspers calls this decision as philosophical faith because it is different from the theological faith that we are all used to. Now, theological faith, as we know, is in a way based on dogmas and religious doctrines. On the other hand, we see that philosophical faith is a free and personal choice. It is not based on external authorities like a church or sacred text. But it is based on a personal choice to affirm transcendence. And unlike religious faith, this philosophical faith does not rely on mystical experiences or logical proofs, because Jaspers believed that trying to prove transcendence would reduce it to something small and limited. For example, a religious believer might say, "I believe in God because the Bible says so." A person with philosophical faith will say that, "I have no proof of God, but I experience something beyond myself and I choose to believe in it." This is why Jaspers describes human experience as a shipwreck. Why? Because we live in an uncertain world where our beliefs are never fully secure. And in this uncertainty, we must either take a leap of faith towards the transcendence, or we must reject it and try to make sense of life in human terms, just as Nietzsche did. Now, why does this matter today? Well, we see that in a world where people struggle to find meaning, these ideas can help us to remember that we are not just passive creatures, but we have the freedom and responsibility to shape our own existence. Now, whether we turn to faith or human reason, what matters is that we make a conscious choice rather than just drifting through life. So that's it for this episode of the contemporary Western philosophers, where we have dealt with Jaspers' philosophy of man. In the next time, or in the next episode, we will deal with Jaspers' philosophy of God, where we take a look at how or why he rejects Christian doctrine, and he speaks about why we cannot define God.